Lionel, is that you?
There, I think I got it. Dave?
Lionel.
Dave?
Lionel.
Bruce?
Good evening.
Bruce?
Lionel?
Yeah. I'm sorry, Bruce. I'm sorry to be putting you through this, buddy.
Oh, what? Oh, no. What now?
Well, it's round 3 of the Abeles Trabachino. I feel like you and I are like...
it's an extravaganza.
Yeah.
That's perfect. That's a perfect word.
It feels like a podcast.
The continuing saga. When we last met our intrepid explorers, they were deep in the jungle of New Jersey Central.
I feel like this is podcast boot camp with these two guys. If you can survive this, you can survive anything on a podcast.
Yeah, it's a run for the money, right?
It's kind of like watching ferrets. If you want to be an educational assistant, if you can handle a pair of ferrets, you can handle any kid.
Ferrets. Well, that came out of nowhere.
Well, it did. Anyhow,
okay,
we digress.
Yeah, exactly.
No, ferrets are wonderful creatures. They come out and they play and just go ballistic for a couple hours, totally on, full out, and then they sleep for a while. So if you can handle looking after ferrets, you can handle pretty much anything.
They pass right out. Yep.
Oh, they do. They just go for 2 hours and
boom.
Boom. That's it. Curl up together and sleep.
Where they lay. Yep.
Yep.
Here's a question for both of you.
Okay.
I don't think we did.
Is it like Jeopardy got a ring in?
No.
Okay.
You don't have to answer in the form of. I don't feel like we did very good in the last episode trying to get Jack to describe to us what it's like to be in charge of scheduling for New Jersey Transit. I felt like I was asking
he kind of like tiptoed along the blue line. It didn't really go in.
Yeah, exactly. He was like, the star forward that doesn't get involved in the fights. He just stands back and kind of watches. And
stands back and lets his people do the work.
Yeah, grabs the other star forward. Like I felt like it was such an untapped source of information for the AML Nation, and yet I just don't think we.
And all we got out of him, he changed his schedule and he got yelled at.
Yeah, like in the 14 years he's worked there, he added one train and made the townsfolk mad. Like that.
There's a movie right there.
Yeah, that's a Hallmark movie.
Well, it's I think we'll get into it a little bit tonight. It's definitely a niche within the railroad industry, which is already a fairly small management team this day and age. Scheduling is its own language. It's its own bailiwick, really. So to describe it, what's it like to schedule or to be in charge of the department? It's sort of one of those questions that can go. Well, you could have a Trabachino Abelian answer, that kind of goes on for 45 minutes.
Yeah.
So it's a dangerous question.
That's kind of where I was at. What was that adjective you used?
Trabachino Abelian.
Abelian. What does that mean, Bruce?
That's a combination of Trabachino and Abeles.
Oh,
yeah. Abeles-esque.
Oh, yeah, well, yeah. Very. I don't think we're going to have time to go back to that subject. I really don't.
Well, we could try to touch on briefly, like if you want to schedule a train, what do you have to consider? And hope we get like 10 minutes.
All right, let's. Well, you know what?
We can try that, and then we got to get into the real meat of tonight. So.
Yeah, we got to get into the meat.
Let's get him in here, and we'll see what happens.
All right. Dave, he's your problem. You go get him.
Yeah, well, I think we've been each other's problems. I'll be right back.
Ever since the great split in grade school.
All right, Jack, here we go. Yeah. Welcome back.
Ever since the great split.
Good to be back.
All right.
Speak up, Jack. Jack.
Good to be back.
Yeah. Put the microphone a little closer to your mouth there, buddy.
There you go. Good to be back.
Okay.
There you go.
Is that as close as it'll go?
No, last time I had it too close, though. No.
Did I say that you had it too close last time?
I think so.
Okay.
I don't know. We'd have to go back to the recording.
Yeah, we would.
Back to the tape.
Well, let's just humor Lionel for a bit and shove it just a titch closer.
There you go. Thanks, Bruce. You notice have you noticed with these two guys there is no yes or no answers?
Maybe.
Bruce is on a roll tonight. I like it.
Yeah.
He's feeling that 87 days.
Yeah, exactly. 80. How many days before you retire? Right at this minute, Bruce, while we're recording.
This minute it'd be 80. I think it's 85 days and about 17 hours, something like that.
Hey, congratulations, my friend. That's great. Good for you.
He hasn't made it yet. He might keel over from a heart attack.
That's good. I might get hit by a bus or a meteorite comes screaming in from outer space.
One never knows.
One never knows.
How many years?
The cat may decide to eat me in the night. I don't know.
How long until you retire, Jack?
I don't know. It's going to be a while.
Okay. Somebody's making noise. Is that you, Jack? Are you fidgeting?
I don't know.
When will you find out? Are your arms? Look down at your hands and see if they're
moving. No.
Okay. All right. Cool. So, anyways, Jack, last time we were talking to you about how long have you been in charge of scheduling for New Jersey Transit?
I'm in charge of the group only a couple of years.
Okay. So, what was that like? Like, did you apply for that job, or did somebody come over and go, "I've had enough, Jack. You're in charge now"?
No, it was mostly a succession thing. The former director of the department, reached retirement age and ready to move on, and I had come up through the ranks of the department. Done a bunch of different roles in the department, so I knew all the different things the department does, and really. I did have to apply. It wasn't just a step into the role type of thing, but yeah, it was mostly because the former director left.
Okay, so whether you were any good or not at the job, they were going to give it to you.
No, not necessarily.
That's what it sounded
like.
like.
Time passed where I only was acting in the role. So there was a dress rehearsal period. I think that where a few critical things happened.
Okay, give us one of those. Give us one of those critical things.
I have to think back to what was happening then.
We were
planning.
Summer of hell.
Dave. Jack's on his own in this one. I know you want to tag in, but just stand in the corner.
I think in that year we had actually we were in the process of designing some service cutbacks that were meant to free up equipment to be rotated through the positive train control program. So we had to, remove a certain number of locomotives and cab cars from regular daily service and figure out what trains would be eliminated temporarily as a result of that.
Okay, so when positive train control started to come in, you had to each locomotive or cab car. By cab car, you mean a car that is at the other end of the push-pull? The opposite end of the locomotive?
Correct. And each locomotive and cab car had to be equipped with hardware to, that the PTC system uses to function. So onboard computers and speed sensors and, new software packages and so on and so forth. The trains actually had to be taken out of service and sent to an off-site vendor to be have that equipment installed. So there was a certain amount of cars on their way to the manufacturer or on their way to the vendor, a certain number of cars there, a certain number of cars coming back and being recommissioned for service. And that reduced our available fleet to the point where we needed to reduce service.
How long did it take to convert something?
See that? See, Bruce right there. That's when I know we're in trouble. When we get the
amount of time. Because there was different types of equipment. There were conventional diesels, dual powers, electric push pulls, multiple unit cars. Each of them had a different design. Some of them went to different vendors, so different types of equipment were off the property, I think, for different amounts of time.
So we talking like weeks, months?
Yeah, I would say a matter of weeks to a month.
Okay.
Jack, could you just scratch your microphone there? Because I got a feeling you're talking through your computer.
Oh, I hope not.
Me too. Do you hear anything, Bruce?
I hear no scratching noise.
I hear no scratching noise either.
I'm tapping.
No, we're not hearing it, buddy.
We're not hearing it.
All right, let me see what I can do about that.
Must be a good time to throw some elevator music.
Yeah, elevator music would be.
We haven't had that for a while.
No. Wait music. In the last episode, we discovered that's wait music because his drum major or the drum line guy or something was fantastic at wait music, and he'd also had an article in Model Railroader.
Yeah, something like that. Yeah.
Yeah.
The real thing's much better.
Yeah. How much snow did you get, Dave?
About 20 inches down in Lebanon.
Oh.
Worked out. It was a beautiful storm. It was gorgeous. We loved it.
Did you? You had fun in it?
Oh God, the kids are still having fun with it. It's nice to see everybody outside playing and having a ball. And I enjoy the change of the seasons a lot. So a good snowstorm is always welcome for me.
Okay, so here's a question while we're waiting on Jack. How would that snowstorm affect the service on New Jersey Transit?
Oh, it's gotten increasingly more. It affects it more, it seems, every year, to the point where Monday they actually suspended service on the whole system.
Is that right?
Which is very rare when you look at the history of NJ Transit. We actually suspended it for the whole day. They didn't even run the trains in the morning. And it's interesting because the other New York services did, and then ended up having to shut their services down midday, and they stranded a bunch of people. So it was a real storm. First one in about 5 years. So it really made some impact down here.
How long is your driveway?
My driveway is like 30 feet long.
Okay.
Yeah. So
how long did the kids to shovel it up here?
Yeah.
Well, Susie helped for the first time this year. That was nice.
Oh, there you go.
And Kristen did a bunch of it, which I was very, very thankful for.
So man, that's something. They shut down the whole system. But of course, I guess right now, because of the whole COVID situation, there's not nearly as many people that would have been left without a ride into the city.
That's true. But it's just, it rubs against the grain. That's the railroad I grew up on ran come hell or high water, or high snow or whatever. And but it's interesting, driving into work on Monday, I got in the car and slid all the way down to Somerville just to be on the property. And the grocery stores were closed. All the restaurants were closed. The gas stations were closed. It's a different world these days where so many things will shut down for inclement weather. It's not the way it was even 20 years ago.
Was that in the family van?
That was in the minivan. Yep. Nice new tires. So it held in pretty well.
Perfect. How you making out there, Jack?
I think I got it.
I think you do too. Scratch that microphone for us, buddy. There you go. Now he's got it.
Sounds good.
Sounds great. I have a question about, we can go back. Bruce, I think we can go back to where we were, right? Bruce is on.
Hi, I was on mute.
Yeah.
But we're all over the place tonight.
No, we're not. This is pretty.
This is par for the course.
This is pretty much. This is pretty.
we had a decent drive off the tee. We're all over the fairway.
Yeah.
Now we're setting up for second shot.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, we're in the first cutter rough.
Well, maybe you are.
So you send these locomotives and cab cars, and you were kind of inferring that sometimes there's unit trains too that would go off for part of this PTC refurbishing.
Multiple units. Those are self-propelled cars.
Well, self-propelled cars like RDCs?
Yes, but electric.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
And do they run in like tandem or triples or singles or?
Yeah, they're in married pairs. We have some singles.
All right. So, where would the vendors be?
I think one of them was in South Plainfield, and another one was, I forget where the other one was. We had multiple vendors
and
doing the work.
So, Dave, is there like a place that fixes locomotives?
Oh, of course.
Okay. Well, I'm asking. You can do.
I mean, we have our own shop that did some of the work. Some what they call the MMC, the Meadows Maintenance Facility, Meadows Maintenance Complex, MMC, but we were so far behind the eight ball that the previous governor administration in New Jersey really, to put it lightly, just didn't focus on this and didn't see it as a mandate, really, and so that the railroad was way behind the eight ball when the current administration took over. And one of the primary missions of the new president of the company was to get us over this positive train control hump. And there's a component with the onboard stuff with the locomotives, the MUs, the cab cars, what have you. There's also a large component for the infrastructure, wayside, the signaling system, a bunch of transponders for our system had to be put in place on the track to help the trains know where they were. And so it was a monumental effort. And because we were so far behind the curve, we basically shopped it out to multiple places. There was the Kiki Shenko shop in South Plainfield. They did some at Morristown and Erie too, didn't they, Jack?
I think so. Yeah, M&E did some of the installs on the GP40s.
Yeah. So I mean, it was sort of an all hands on deck, full on attack to try and get over the hump, and they pulled it off twice, really. One to get the basic stuff had to be in place the end of 2018, and then here at the end of 2020 we had to have a working system, and they made both by a matter of weeks each time. So it was pretty impressive work.
So how many? So do you have a Jack? Do you have a what's the word, Bruce? We're on over extra. Do you have extra locomotives and cab cars so that if you get there in the morning, and so like how does this work? Like there's all of a sudden there's locomotives. There's two locomotives that like. Are you involved at all in like, oh my God, the locomotives for train such and such aren't working? Somebody like, is there extra locomotives and cab cars laying around?
There may be. There may be spares at times, but since you don't know where a failure is going to be, it may not always be possible to reposition an okay locomotive in place of one that has a failure, say on a daily inspection. So it really, there's a whole bunch of variables that feed into that. Sometimes you can position the spare equipment out there and get the train, save the train essentially. A lot of times, they're doing these daily inspections overnight. Wee hours in the morning, and first train's due out at 5 or whatever train it is. Whenever it's due out, if there's not enough hours to actually, or not enough manpower, you need a crew to run that spare engine up to an outlying yard. So in the end, there's just a lot of variables that play into whether a spare can be positioned to replace a failure.
Bruce, I think I must have had the right pregame meal. I feel like I'm on a roll. I think my next question. I think what my next question is going to be exactly what we were trying to go for next time.
Okay, I'm going to throw one in first.
Okay, you go first, yeah.
Obviously, in the course of any day, there'll be a number of units, be it electric, diesel, combo, whatever, in the shop being routinely serviced. Here it's a two-part question. How many units does New Jersey Transit have, and how many would be sort of routinely going through their daily and monthly servicing or whatever?
On any given day, I don't know the exact numbers, actually, to tell you the truth. I mean, I know where to go look for that answer. Our equipment manipulation book has a cover page. It says this is a number of each type of equipment we have that's required for daily service. So it's a certain number of MUs on each division, a certain number of electrics on each division, a certain number of diesels on each division. And out of the total fleet, there is a spare margin. There's a shop margin for engines. But what ends up happening is some of those engines fail at a higher rate. So they have a higher shop margin. But I'm not exactly sure off the top of my head, without referring to a piece of paper, I don't know the exact.
So we talk like maybe 5% of the total fleet is undergoing service at any one time?
It's higher than that.
Higher than that. Okay.
Yeah, definitely. Because you got to, the main consideration there is the age of the equipment. Our MUs date back to the early 1980s. They were rebuilt in the early 1990s. I mean, that is old equipment. And the same goes for a lot of our GP40s. We have engines out there that go back to 1968.
Wow.
And they're they're slowly being phased out. And then, the stuff you bring in is all brand new technology, that sometimes your, outlying mechanical forces might not be, totally perfectly familiar with. It's almost like it's easier to fix a car from 1970 than it is to fix a car now. Car from 1970, you opened up the hood, or you found the parts that weren't working, and you replaced it yourself. Nowadays, you have anything go wrong with a car, you're taking it to a shop or to a dealer.
Yeah, in the 70s, you could pull the rotor cap off and change everything, and then put it all back together. Yeah,
right. So just the technology on board these engines, a lot of the time requires that if there is a failure, it's with a sensor or with something that's technological or a component that has to be replaced, and for it to be replaced, it has to be shopped. And I don't work for the mechanical department, so I don't know, all of this in precise detail. So
we have
I'm a little out of my depth.
No, but the question was really how many extra units do you have? Not how do you fix the sensor if it goes down.
It's about 80 locomotives overall, if I'm not mistaken, but that's changed quite a bit lately, and there's new acquisitions coming as well. And I think Jack's right. It's probably about, if I had to guess, I would say about 20% is regularly shopped. And it's a lot of that's pre-programmed maintenance where there's daily inspections there's a whole bunch of different FRA mandated inspections.
No, there's like 45-day, 90-day, and stuff like that, or whatever.
Yeah,
right? All that.
Here, I got a equipment book cover page here. So our system totals are 113 train set starts, 99 electric multiple units, 41 electric locomotives, 8 dual power locomotives, 47 diesels, 295 coaches, 59 cab cars, 254 multi-level coaches, and 37 multi-level cab cars.
And that's the starting. So, like, at
that's
4
required
a.m.
for service.
Right, 4 a.m. on a Monday. That's what's running.
Wow.
Now,
So
so on top of that, there's stuff being serviced.
Yeah, that's a Roger. Yeah.
Excellent.
Bruce?
Yes.
I think it's behooves us for me to take responsibility, because I really think for me to take I think it's the interviewer's responsibility to ask the right questions.
Okay.
And I think this time, man, I feel like we're at the top of our game. I wish this was playoffs, because we'd win this game.
Well, it is.
Yeah, we just fought to make the playoffs. Now we're playing for the rest.
So I have a
tiebreaker, right?
Yeah. I have a question. And then this is the last question, and then we will close this subject and maybe come back to it in another day when we are interviewed again in the future. So you're sitting there in your office and you're knocking back a coffee and a chocolate glazed donut, and all of a sudden it turns out that a train has died in service 30 miles halfway down the line. So the train's just completely quit. You can't get it going. The starter's shot. So what happens at that point from the operations standpoint when a train just is, it's full of people, it quits, and how does that affect you in your day-to-day life, or does it affect you at all? It's not your problem because you've already set the schedule.
Yeah, in my personal day-to-day life, that doesn't have anything to do with me. Okay. That's left up to the dispatchers and the chief dispatcher, the director of system operations, the mechanical department. They come up with a plan. Is it going to be the next train that comes along? They'll transfer the customers. Send out a rescue locomotive to pick up the failed equipment and drag it back to the shop or drag it out to the yard. That's something they deal with in real time. Okay,
so then it sounds like basically your job was done 20 years ago, and you just go into the office and eat bonbons and drink coffee, because, like, what does the scheduling department do during the day if they don't have any actual interaction with the day-to-day operation of the railroad?
Well, what we're doing during the day is when someone comes along to us and says, hey, for this major initiative, the PTC program, on a normal day, you need 47 diesels to run the service you have. And, we need you to make that 42. And each of those diesels that you're taking away runs 4 or 5 or 6 trips, revenue trains a day. How do you rearrange the revenue schedules so that the system works with 42 diesels instead of 47? And if the number of trains you run today with 47 diesels, just can't be made to work with 42 diesels, what trains do you take out of the schedule? What adjacent trains cover the stops? Which trains are, how do you justify the choice you made, to the public and to your riders and, internally?
So how would you make those choices? Like,
well, we know the riders. Oh, sorry, go ahead.
I was just going to say, take Dave's. What line do you live on, Dave?
The Raritan Valley line.
All right, so the Raritan Valley line is going to lose 2 diesels today for a week. So how would you determine which trains don't run?
Well, we would go in and look at the ridership on all the trains and look at the ones. A lot of times it's not just taking 2 trains and making them 1. It might be taking 3 trains and making them 2, or 4 trains and making them 3. And rearranging the stopping patterns and understanding how the ridership is distributed at the different stations along the line, to come up with a new schedule that fits the number of customers that are on those trains onto the number of trains we have left. And the other option we have to help us through that is we can make the trains bigger. So we may have, we may be looking at something with 4 6-car trains, and we maybe say, if we change the schedule around and change the stops around, we can do this with 3 8-car trains. And each train will be making more stops. There'll be a trip time impact. There'll be a cycling impact for mechanical inspections and so on and so forth. But it's all about matching the remaining capacity or matching the capacity we have up with the demand we have. And that can take months to figure out. So that's the the bonbons part is.
But how could it be months?
Those are not simple problems.
But how could it be months if tomorrow you're going to be down 2 diesels?
Well, that's the thing is it's not tomorrow. We knew in advance that that our fleet was going to need to be reduced in order for us to make our PTC targets. So it was beginning in if we make these cuts effective in October. And we do, this many diesels a week, we'll have this many diesels equipped by the end of the year, or this many diesels equipped by mid-December, and then we'll make our target.
Right. Has there ever been a situation where when you leave tonight, when you leave at the end of workday, you find out that tomorrow line X is going to be down 1 train? Is there ever a situation where it's that short of notice where all of a sudden you have to figure out line isn't X, Y, and Z it's going to be down a train tomorrow. So what are we going to do, boys?
Yeah, there are times we've worked with our operating people to come up with, what's the correct strategy, or what do we have to make sure we cover. And I guess one of the funny ones is, we have 2 trains on the line that I ride to work, that basically make the same set of stops, except the one that I take runs first and it serves North Broad Street where I get off, and the one that runs 20 minutes behind it skips North Broad Street. And what they would do, because there's so few people who actually get off at North Broad Street, is they would just say, well, the customers from this first train, they just wait 20 minutes for the second train and it's fine. And every time I would go to get on that second train, that train would go flying through North Broad Street. And it'd be like, well, you have customers for North Broad Street who are either making transfers to go to Hoboken or doing whatever. And, we have to accommodate them on this second train also. So, we've come up with kind of templates, I guess you would say, for situations like that, where, okay, if you're going to lose, if you lose this particular train, don't throw all the stops to the next train, or, split the stops up this way, and that'll make it so that, the adjacent trains don't get too overcrowded. Or that, customers don't lose too much time making additional stops, that kind of thing.
What were you going to say, Dave?
The one thing I wanted to add before we move on is that what's impressed me most about Jack's embracing of his role at Transit, talk about jumping in with both feet. Where I think his skill really shines is when there's not a train that breaks down or not, a minor service adjustment, but it's when something big happens, like God forbid, like that Hoboken derailment where we had the guy fall asleep in the cab of the cab car and go through the bumper at Hoboken Terminal, and then trying to come up with an entirely new service plan within a day or 2, where he mobilizes his department and they come up with an entirely new plan with available equipment on basically a new set of infrastructure without this number of tracks or without this crossover. I think that department, when Sandy came and flooded a bunch of equipment, we were cut out of a bunch of the equipment that was previously available. When New York Penn Station had a derailment and it took out like an entire crossover, and it was going to be weeks before they got it back in service. That was an Amtrak derailment. Like some of these major, and Jack's department pulls together, and somehow, working 24/7. They come up with an entirely new service schedule with an entirely new equipment turnover and a crewing plan, because it's 3 separate parts. It's the schedule, but then it's getting the guys to run the trains, and then it's turning the equipment, and all of this stuff. It's to watch. It is absolutely fascinating to listen to him talk about it in real time with the head of the company, with the president of the company, and they listen to Jack because Jack knows what he's talking about.
So how do you get him to talk about it?
Well, we just did. And the coolest
I asked him a question like that, and he said, "Oh, it takes. We have months in advance to do it." And you just told me about 3 different incidents where.
Well, you got to ask the railroader. You got to ask the railroader.
Well, you've also, you asked about. We were following a specific example.
No, Jack. There is no specifics here on the AML. You have to learn to roll with the punches, and there are no specifics. I was trying to, when I'm asking a question, I'm searching for information, and I'm looking for and you have to try to. It's like when the guy fell asleep and went through the Hoboken bumper stop. You just they didn't tell you that ahead of time, did they?
No, that was a hard day.
Yeah, you're not Jack, Dave. Try to relax.
Impossible.
So they didn't. I agree. There was a better answer to your question.
Okay. Well, we got to stop now because we've had a lot of fun. But that was good. I think we added a lot to the last podcast by having those kind of questions. And be prepared in future, Jack. Make notes of anything that happens like that so you can tell us about it because people are interested. People are interested in the inner workings of the railroad. That I know you can't tell us everything, but you can tell. I'd love to have you three guys, Dave and Jack and Rich, on to talk about when 9/11 happened or when the Sandy hurricane happened and what all takes place in order to get through those disasters. I think it'd be very, very interesting.
Yeah, that would be a great discussion. Yeah, because that's I think that gets to that's what we spend. I think those are such fundamental learning experiences. As the person who's supposed to be in charge, you learn things you never knew about the railroad and about your customers and about how hard you can work and about how hard your people can work. Those are formative experiences.
Well, and I think we've been in, it's funny. It reminds me of a story from the U.S. Navy. There's the USS Intrepid is the aircraft carrier museum in New York City. And there's a story on board that aircraft carrier, which was around at the end of World War II, where it was hit with a kamikaze in 1945 and then was attacked by a submarine with torpedoes. And it was one of these, it was like, and at one point the skipper says, "My God, are we the only ship in the ocean?" Because they were just getting completely hammered. And I feel that NJ Transit has been the only railroad in North America in the last 10 years because of the variety of both internal and external disasters that we've had to face, more than any other that I can tell, with the exception of Amtrak, who's been there with us, because we run on so many of the same tracks here. But between service cuts and budget cuts and Hurricane Sandy and blizzards, we had an earthquake. We had, our primary terminal in New York Penn Station had Amtrak took tracks out of service for emergency replacement of the entire infrastructure in like the busiest station in the Western Hemisphere. And Jack's group had to just figure out what to do. Like there's no failure. See no failure. Otherwise you're going to sink like the Intrepid would have sunk. And they did it. They pulled it off time and time again. You can't make it up, the amount of emergencies they've had to deal with. So very impressive.
Are either of you guys familiar with the movie Apollo 13?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So,
Bruce, I feel like
Yes.
I envision that scene where the guy that was in charge of everything, he takes a bunch of engineers into a room and he drops a bunch of stuff on the table and he says, "We need a compressor, or we need something to make air." And
the air filter for the LEM.
Right, he needed an air filter for the LEM, and he drops all the stuff on the table, and he says, "Okay, gentlemen, this is what we need." And I see Jack and Dave and a few others in a room, and then he goes, "And failure is not an option." That's the way I imagine it.
Yeah, I mean,
is that what you do with your guys, Jack? You take them into a room and then go, "And gentlemen, failure is not an option."
Well, I think everyone knows that innately.
Well, maybe they do, but would it hurt you to remind them?
Well, if the situation's urgent enough, they'll know. But I feel like, in those situations where where we don't have those months to plan, what we're really brought into the room for.
Well, okay, let me put it to you.
What we're really brought into the room for in planning is knowing where our customers are, how many there are, for each different type of zone, what we can get away with combining, what we can get, that's where the operational,
how many guys do you have?
Aspect of our knowledge gets put to work.
Sure. How many guys do you have under your charge? People, ladies and gentlemen, how many ladies and gentlemen are under your charge? Do you say
13?
13. So when you drag these 13 people into the room and you dump the stuff on the table, and one of the guys wears wrinkled clothes and is kind of scruffy and has only been there a few weeks and, dresses like he just got out of the washing machine. Don't you feel at that point it would be ideal, even though everybody should know it? Don't you feel at that point it would be ideal to turn to the room and go, "And gentlemen, failure is not an option." Just so that one guy who's wearing the wrinkled clothes is kind of on the same page as everybody else.
Well, it's funny. The guy who's most like that now is hard to slow down. He'll go off and make up, and he's one of the most intense people I've ever seen. And when I feel I need to remind somebody of the urgency of the mission, I focus on that as an individual, but usually that's not the case. It's very interesting. Our whole department, is sort of like that. Has that mad scientist effect to them. And it doesn't escape notice of everybody else. But the thing is that they come to us and they know we're going to be able to come up with something. They know that we're going to be able to, give them good answers and good information to act on and good suggestions about how to handle the situation we're in. And, I think that's that takes precedence now over, whether you're wearing a starched shirt or not. Right. It wasn't always like that.
Right.
But I think now,
you broke the barrier, Jack. You did
that's
good.
One of the positive things that's changed.
How about this? Could you do it for me anyways the next time there's maybe not a super big emergency, but sort of kind of like a semi-emergency, and you have everybody in the room? Could you just, to humor me, could you just go, and gentlemen, failure is not an option?
I'm sure they'll love that. I'm sure they'll be like, wait, failure was an option? They didn't know failure is not an option.
So is that a yes or a no?
Oh, okay, it's a yes.
All right, thank
you. Well, all right.
Yeah. All right, so enough of this. Now we're going to get to brass tacks. We're going to roll the clock. We're going to roll the clock back. I'm guessing about 20. I'm guessing this is somewhere in the 20-year range, and we're going to roll the clock back to the first time Dave's dad goes to visit a new lady friend, and he calls Dave on the first date, and he says, Dave, you got to get over here.
I won't ever forget it.
All right, so give us a little background on that, Dave.
I won't ever forget it. So Jack grew up in a family with a lot of O-gauge trains. Jack's dad is a big O-gauge fan, 3-rail. Loved a lot of the anthracite railroads in northeastern United States, so CNJ. He had grown up, as you guys recall from the previous discussions, along the CNJ main line outside of Elizabeth. And then we had, the Lehigh Valley was close by, and the Erie Lackawanna and the Erie. So there's a variety of really interesting and long-standing railroads in New Jersey history and in the anthracite history of the northeastern United States. But I was an HO guy. I grew up with HO scale, had my 4x8 sheet of plywood and the walk-through spare bedroom, growing up in the house. And Jack and I, fast friends, I started to learn a lot more about Lionel trains and O-gauge, and he started to learn a lot more about HO. We traded back and forth, and then life went on. We ended up in college, and a couple of years after that, my sister had passed away, and my dad finally had some free time on his hands. And so mutual friends set him up on a blind date with this woman, Barbara Siegelman, from, at this point, Bedminster, New Jersey. And she goes by Babbi for short. And so he goes on this date, and he called. I knew he was going on a date. I was happy for him because he'd been through more than people should have to go through in their lifetime, especially at the age he was. And it was a real joy to see him open his life up again and start to be able to, he was amazing. He carried a lot of that weight very much in stride. And, there was, the usual flashpoints and things, but really an unbelievable display of strength to be able to carry that much loss. So to see him start to be excited about dating a woman again, that was fantastic. It was a thrill. So I know he's going on this date, and then the phone rings, and I'm like, man, it's like 7:30. Like, I guess it must not have been a very good date. D, you got to get over here. What, Dad? What is it? Your house? Are you done with the date? No, I'm at Babbi's now, and she's just showing me the gardens. But David, she's got this big Lionel train in the basement. You got to come over and see it. I said, Dad, you're on your first date. I'm not crashing your first date. Well, come on, she won't mind. I'm like, have you asked her? He's like, no. I'm like, Dad, no, dude, I'm not coming on your first date. I'm like, call me, have a fun time tonight. Tell her I'll come see it soon. But, we'll figure it out. So anyway, that was that. So he calls me after the date, like 10 o'clock at night, which is late for him. And he says, D, you got to come see it. I told her we're coming tomorrow. I said, okay. So the next day, I met my dad. I was living in Westfield at the time. I drove out from Westfield, from the house I was rented with some former college buddies. And Dad drove down from Long Valley, and we met at Babbi's in Bedminster. And I walked into this beautiful house on a horse farm. And we walked into the basement. And sure enough, it is the biggest home Lionel, really the biggest to that date. It was the biggest home layout I'd ever seen. And as we talked about, Jack and I didn't have a whole lot of exposure really to the rest of the model railroading community in New Jersey, which is sort of ironic. But back in the pre-social media days, there wasn't necessarily a way to get in touch with those people. So we sort of did our own thing. And I got on my little flip phone. This would have been about September. It was the fall of 2000. Yeah, about the fall of 2000. So I'm wrong. I had the date screwed up. My sister actually was still alive at that point. But in any case, it was definitely before 2001. It was definitely 2000 when we met Babbi. And sure enough, like I say, Jack, dude, what are you doing tonight? You were living in Hillsborough, right, Jack, at that time?
Yeah. Yep.
Yeah. I said, man, do you have any of your trains at your house? And he's like, yeah, I got a bunch of them. I said, man, you got to come up. And I don't remember if you came right up that night, Jack, or if we set a different date. But I remember that it took a while to figure out how the guy had it wired so that we could just get it running again. And once Jack came up and we started to run this guy at a bunch of different trains, some old, some new, some really nice stuff and some really chintzy stuff that wasn't in really good shape. The wiring was kind of shoddy. The track was not good at all, really, but it was huge. This layout it had to be 25 by 50. I mean, it just a huge layout of line.
Well, the other, tough part of that story was that a significant portion of his collection had been pilfered.
Yes, right, by a former groundskeeper or something, right?
Yeah, and it was, it was obviously by someone relatively inexperienced because they neglected to take the boxes, or they took the powered engine and left the non-powered engine, or but there was. That was a tough thing to discover because there was a lot of, it was a really, it was kind of a sprawling, it was kind of a classic, 3-rail Lionel collection, which is like a little bit of everything. You'll have a CSX-8 and a Reading T1 or in the same collection, which just doesn't happen anywhere but Lionel 3-rail.
Union Pacific Challenger, 611.
Yeah, just
and
all
then like
over
the Mickey
the place.
Mouse train.
Yeah. He had the entire run of like Disney high cube boxcars, which is just that's just like a palm slap, whatever for us. But it didn't matter because that collection was so huge that if you did not want to run the Donald Duck boxcar, you didn't really have to worry about it because there were enough other cars to fill the railroad and then some. But the tough part was it was pilfered by someone who almost knew what they were doing. They knew the nicest stuff, probably by looking at the price tags on the boxes or something. But they took the stuff but left the boxes, I guess, so that it would, so that the theft wouldn't be apparent. Because at the time the layout hadn't been run since he had passed. Basically, it hadn't really been looked at, so no one was going down into that basement and checking that all the trains were still there or whatever. So someone figured out over a period of time, I think, that no one's looking at this, and if I take the engines out of the boxes, no one's going to look at the boxes, pawn them or whatever. So that was a bummer.
So did you guys get it running?
We did, yeah. And I remember I think I got it one or two of the things working because it was he basically had 3 or 4 loops of different lengths and different mainline configurations on one of the giant tables, and the other smaller table was a separate loop. And I was able to get 1 or 2 of them working, but he had all sorts of relays and the wire was all just leftover wire from construction projects. He was a contractor that built commercial malls and buildings and things. So the layout was sort of an amalgamation of a bunch of leftover stuff from his projects. And so you'd have a red wire that turned into a black wire that became 2 green wires and went to 2 different pieces of track. It was a nightmare to try and track it down. So I was able to get one or 2 things working, and she was all excited. She says, you say I have a friend? I said, oh, yeah. And she's like, well, anytime you guys want to come and run the trains, I would just love to see it used. I said, all right. So I think Jack and I came back a couple days later or a week later or whatever. Jack brought some of his trains up that he had stored at his apartment. He didn't have a layout in the apartment down in Hillsborough. And so we broke them out of the boxes, and Jack was able, when Jack and I were there that first night together, I think we were there for like 8 hours, and we got everything running. It was awesome.
Yeah. And he had built a primitive like control panel type thing with like a map of the layout, and, all these double pull, double throw switches that turn blocks on and off, to route power. And this is something that I had never really given a lot of thought to, which is routing electricity to come from a certain throttle. So that was a huge experience right there in and of itself. And you could tell he had a very specific vision. It was almost like there were aspects of it that were almost like a European layout where, and I don't really feel like I've seen this much on the American layouts I've been to, which is, sort of the non-railroad goings on, animation of things that like a beer hall or a carnival or something that's not railroad related at all, but is railroad adjacent, that is animated. This guy, I think, Dave, he had a grave scene.
He had a working grave.
He had a working grave
where
scene.
The backhoe was digging
where the
grave.
Backhoe, was excavating a grave. And that, we didn't really understand that.
That's fact. That was wild.
And it was built, it was built on this box frame that was going to have a motor so that like this backhoe would be excavating this grave and there were people standing over it. It was so morbid. And he may have had some other stuff there too. I'm trying to remember what other, sort of sideshow things he had that was going to make it like a, almost like a full on, animated carnival. And which is, again, that's not something you really see. You see that on a lot of European railroads, just not so much on American model railroads.
So did you guys start operating it on a regular basis, or like, what did you have a key to the house, or like, how would you get in?
We had to call up and make a date. But at that point it was, we would be going there, once a week or once every couple of weeks. It was like our Friday and Saturday night thing. Like other people would go out to bars or something, and pick up girls or whatever they do. And, Dave and I would meet in this basement and
grab a pizza, bring the pizza, grab a case of beer,
talk about life and, get on with it. And what was really interesting about this too was that it was like this incrementalism. You start running it and you could immediately see all the things that were wrong with it. And, whether it was mechanical with track or whether it was with switches that didn't work or whether it was, these loops are wired this way. And if I want to run a train from, the outside track to the inside track, I can't have any other trains anywhere on the railroad because the wiring isn't designed to allow that to happen. And that was, as we started working together and things got more and more complicated, we started to undertake to fix that, a lot of that stuff. And I think that's where, it got very involved to where it became its own, like sort of its own existence. We started to build an operating plan. We started to find, I think the first night we ran there, we were only able to control both layouts because I think this guy never ran with other people. He ran the whole show by himself. So he had like this big main board with like a pit in the middle. You had to crawl on your hands and knees, for like 5 feet to get underneath and get up in the middle where the control pit was. And there was, I guess it must have been I don't know. I forget, maybe a 16-foot by 16-foot roughly square board, right, Dave? Something like that, or
at least, yeah, it
16 by 20.
I think it was about 16 by 20. Yep.
Yeah, so that would have been like the main table, and then he had a whole nother 6-foot by 12-foot table adjacent to that was connected, across a gap by 2 bridges, and he was controlling stuff that was like 30 feet away from him.
Easy,
with a Lionel ZW. And so because he was the only guy running the thing, there was only so many trains he could run at a time. I think the first few nights, Dave and I actually tried to run trains there. It was just like, okay, I'll go in the middle and be the engineer, and Dave will be the brakeman. And we ran trains around, did some switching, whatever. And I think the real breakthrough for Dave and I was actually separating those railroads, those 2 tables into actually 2 side-by-side functioning layouts that were connected by these 2 bridges. So I think Dave brought down one of his old transformers. I brought down one of my old transformers, and we actually separated the wiring so that, Dave would have his own train set and I would have my own train set, essentially. And that the operation was connected by these 2 bridges. And
so is that what
Dave sort of...
So
go ahead.
Is that what you guys did then for a while? It's just like, how long did it take you to get it running? And like, was this like every week, or like you say, every other week?
Oh my God. Yeah, Lionel, we were over there. I mean,
I lost track of time.
That first year, we were probably there, I don't know, 60, 70 times.
Yeah.
in a year. I mean, it was more than once a week for long stretches.
So where was Babbi hanging out when you guys were down in her basement?
But Babbi was upstairs on the phone.
Watching Fox News or on the phone.
And she would talk to all her friends from all over the country until like 2:00 in the morning. And then she'd come down and kick us out. And and
get out! I gotta go to bed.
I mean, most of the time I wouldn't even know what we asked if we could reorganize the track to make it run better. And she says, "You guys can do whatever you want. I just love to see it used." I said, "Well, do you mind if we change some of the stuff?" She's like, "David, you change whatever you want to change. Have fun." So we like stripped most of the track off, relayed it with Atlas O-gauge track at that time, put in new interlockings, rewired the whole freaking thing.
Yeah, it was a lot of it was incremental over the course of time, but I
first
still
2 or 3 years, we put a lot of work into it until about probably 2002 or 2003, and we were operating it the whole time.
So I think the big breakthrough though was separating the two tables almost into two railroads or two divisions of a single railroad. And what the smaller layout was sort of set up as like a terminal operation. So that had like a loop of track. It had a figure 8 type arrangement with this like sort of arrangement that was supposed to look like a yard. So what would happen then is I would deliver a train to Dave, and Dave would have to take this train of like 25 cars and break it all down and stuff the cars into all these tracks, and then build another outbound train to send back to me. That was sort of the original.
Right. That's right.
That was sort of our original operating plan.
And so how long did this go on for?
I think that first phase, I guess what I'm trying to remember, Dave, is when did we add the yard? Because we went back there and we built an entire yard, a classification yard.
We took all the extra track the guy had around, extra track Jack had, and I brought my dad. My dad had My dad had a just around the Christmas tree train set from when he was a kid. So that ZW I brought down, and that's what became my ZW on my side of the railroad. We built it was an L shape, but it was probably an 8-foot by 12-foot L, a huge, with all the leftover plywood we found in the basement. She didn't care. So we built this. We built a classification yard that could hold 675 O-gauge cars. It was huge. His basement was massive.
Yeah, we had an LCL terminal in there and everything.
Yeah, and an engine yard, and what I started to do then, because I got tired of just being Jack's, switching guy. Like Jack would dump this train on me, and there's nothing I could it wasn't fun. My whole railroad was like full of freaking cars, and I was like, dude, this is when we first started to use FRS radios too. Because you had to shout across the basement.
You couldn't hear each other.
So I went to Walmart and bought a set of little radios and then we'd fill the whole basement with Lionel train smoke too, because all the engines had smoke.
Well, before that,
perfect.
So we smoked the whole place out. But because we'd fill the whole basement with smoke, and it's all got sound because it's O-gauge. And this was for me I didn't have a real, besides my 4x8 layout HO at home with old Athearn wire handrails, the old sintered iron wheels. There was no sound. I had no idea about command control. This is 2000. I never even touched it. So Jack's locomotives, Lionel at that point, and MTH, all their even on conventional block control, these engines all had sound. They all had smoke. They all had working lights. I didn't have any of that on my HO stuff. So we would fill this basement with sound and smoke, and we couldn't hear each other. So
just the sound of the trains moving. You move a 25-car train in O-gauge over a bunch of switches. You're not going to hear anything else.
Yeah, it's impressive. So we got these radios, and we started to actually, once the classification yard was built, it was much easier to process a train from Jack. So I would accept a train over one of these bridges, and we developed a system of running time. So rather, a certain number of laps around the layout, or not certain number, but
it was a certain amount of time.
Amount of time, right?
Yeah, so basically you had the classification yard, and then the other layout was one where the trains went out and did laps. It wasn't really set up like as an operation that we would understand today with sidings and wave freights and stuff like that.
Well, that side of the layout was more of like a multiple track main line.
Yeah. Okay.
So, and then
like a typical template, you're out there, you're running the trains, and
right. And then in the middle though was what we called, I guess, the Millstone branch. There was like a secondary main that had all of these industries attached to it. So that one, it had like a power plant. It had a refrigeration industry. It had a coal loaders,
a roller bearing factory,
roller bearing, scrap. Yeah, there was just all kinds of stuff in there. So there was a lot of local business that was off this secondary main.
So I have a question. So during this time, would Dave's dad be over there?
No, not usually. Dad was on dates with Babbi, and we would be at Babbi's when she was around, talking to her friends late at night. So my dad would see her, once a week or once every couple of weeks or whatever. And I just asked her if I could give her a call separately. She said no problem. So we'd go, Jack and I would go over after work on a Tuesday night, get a pizza, and be there till 2:00 in the morning. Because when you're 20 something, you can, that was fine. And this was in the time Jack was working part-time jobs, going to grad school. I was working on the railroad, but living in a $400 a month room in this house with these other guys I went to college with. So I had money coming out the wazoo. I didn't know what to do with it all. So I bought some O-gauge engines. I was in the band at the time, so we'd play in Hoboken or New York City, and then it was just young and free. So we spent a lot of time over there, though.
Yeah, and I think
as opposed to now, you're old and have a ball and chain attached to you.
Relatively, yeah.
Yeah, we should cut that out.
Kids will do that to you.
We should cut that out too. So how many years did this transpire over?
We ran at Babbi's right through. I mean, even after you were married, right, Jack?
Yeah.
I mean, it was.
We were there. I think it really fizzled out around 2015.
2015.
Yeah.
That's
what 2012 to 2015. That's sort of what I remember.
It went on for 15 years.
Yeah, it went on for a long time.
It was certainly 12 or 13 years of hardcore running there all the time. And I think once you had kids, Jack, that was when Kate came along. We spent a lot less time there.
Yeah, there was that, but I also think once you started fulfilling your own vision with the Onondaga Cutoff and got that operating.
Yeah.
Once the Onondaga Cutoff was operating, that was really where things started to spread out. Just because there was another thing for us to focus on that was ours, and Dave had a project that there's only so much free time you can.
Especially once you're married and you start to have kids.
Right.
That was the OC's first operating session was 2011, and the coolest part about the Babbi's experience, besides I don't know. I mean, it took what was already a very strong, 20-year or 18-year friendship by that point, and made it permanent. I mean, it was our common interest, which we ended up having a lot of common interests, obviously. But Babbi's really it set the tone for my adult life. It really changed the way I interacted with just about everybody in my world. Because I never had that kind of disposable space to run model trains.
Well, it was also, I think in a lot of ways it was a prototype for a lot of the things you see on the Onondaga Cutoff.
Without a doubt.
And, one of the things it's a prototype for is how we rotate cars. So, when you go and you stand there and you look at this thing and there's all these cars and all these industries and, all this space. Yeah, go ahead.
I'm sorry. So your dad was dating this Babbi for 12 or 13 or 15 years?
My dad was dating Babbi for about 7 years.
Oh.
Yes.
But after the 7 years, you were able to keep going?
How long was that break, Jack? It was a good 3 or 4 months that Babbi wouldn't call me back. And I finally I called her a couple times. She didn't return the call. I waited a few weeks. I called her back. And I finally caught her, and she kind of sighed, and she's like, David, I don't know what to say. I'm like, I don't know what to say either. I'm like really embarrassed. And she's like, you guys should come back over. Come back. We'll talk. Come on over and we'll talk. Come over on Friday night. I said, okay. And so we were able to sit down and sort of have a seance about how my dad dropped the ball with her.
Well, how did that happen?
Well, that's a story we talked about in the original trilogy. You remember the hat trick?
Well, let's remind everybody.
Yeah. So Dad had been dating Babbi for a while, and then another mutual friend introduced him to another woman, and they became fast friends, and he really fell for this other woman. And Babbi had sent clear signals to my dad over the last year or two of their relationship that she was very happy with being good friends and going out to dinner sometimes with mutual friends and doing some gardening together, but that was it. She wasn't really interested in long-term, in getting married again or anything like that. So Dad, I didn't realize it at the time, but Dad really did want to get married again. He wanted to be with someone. So he and Babbi kept hanging out, and he started hanging out with this new woman, and that went quickly, and everything came together well. And Dad, got invited to Babbi's granddaughter's high school graduation, Gil St. Bernard's in outside Gladstone. And for whatever reason, decided during that ceremony that was the time to tell Babbi about the new girlfriend. I guess because that way maybe she wouldn't be so upset or something. I don't know what he was thinking. I'm pretty obtuse, but holy moly, that's world class. Or lack of world class.
It certainly is different, that's for sure.
So poor Babbi, of course, was devastated. And, Dad told me what had happened. And he's like, you probably won't hear from her for a while. I said, well, yeah, you think? So, oh my God. So it literally, I think I waited a month, and Jack and I had to go out to the bars. We weren't even familiar with it anymore at that point. But by that time we were both working at Transit. So our paths crossed on a regular basis. And so, the friendship, there was no bump in the road there, but it was around that time. So that would have been because my dad married Brooke in 2006. So this would have been 2005. So Dad dated Babbi for 5 years, almost 6 years.
And then met Brooke, and that was a whirlwind romance by the sounds of it.
Yeah, they were married in 13 months. I mean, it was, my dad, who always preached caution to the wind for my brother and I, got married in 13 months. We never let him forget it. But it was in the end, it worked out well for Dad, and Babbi, Babbi moved on and it was fine. But
so how did you break the news to Jack?
Oh, I when Dad told me about that, I went to see Jack the next day at work, and I was like, I think we're in some serious poo. I use different language.
Oh, really?
Yeah. And he's like, what? I'm like, oh no. Yeah, but I don't know how to say it.
Funny thing there is we were so committed, like I had every piece of train equipment that I owned in this basement at this point. And I had bought, obviously when you don't have a layout, well, some people, when they don't have a layout, they buy a lot of trains anyway. But during the years that I didn't have a layout, I didn't really buy a lot of trains. But once we started going to Babbi's again, well, that got me pretty inspired. So, I had bought thousands of dollars worth of locomotives and cars and, and it was all down in that basement. And so the possibility of being cut off somehow or ownership being questioned, that was pretty devastating at the time.
Yeah.
But you just had faith or whatever, and I always figured, at least as far as Babbi went, that, and this might not be maybe the best self-preservation attitude, but my attitude towards trains too has always been, look, you paid the money, you had a good time with it. If it all, if a sinkhole opened up under our house and the trains got swallowed, the money still would have been well spent because of all the time we got to enjoy there, the generosity of this woman to just let us in her house, without really any questions being asked, and the value that was to us. So I don't know. On one hand, I tried to be philosophical about it and say, hey, look, if I don't see the trains that are down there again, it was a good run. But, on the other hand, there's that part of you that's like, boy, that would be terrible. How would I ever recover from that? I can't spend that money over again.
So do you remember where you were when Dave told you?
No, I don't. Probably in my office, but I don't really know.
I think we were at work, but I don't remember the specifics of that either.
You guys have
It didn't turn out to be that dramatic a thing, though.
No, I mean, after a couple of weeks, again, I called her, and it took a couple of weeks after that. So it was a month and a half or 2 months when I think I finally got to talk to her again, and within a few months, we were back running trains like nothing had changed, and no one talked about it, and we just kept doing it. But it's amazing. I mean, Babbi's was where I would talk to my best friend about the girl I met. When I met Kristen, Babbi's was the place when we went through a terrible breakup, or when something bad happened at work, or I remember when Kate when I got married in 2008, Jack's wife and Jack obviously were at the wedding. Jack was in the wedding, of course, and Jack's wife was pregnant. 7 months pregnant with his daughter, with his first kid. So, we went through that together, and we talked about it at Babbi's, at length, till late at night. And it was just a wonderful opportunity to learn from Jack about operations, because Jack built this operating plan at Babbi's to run trains in circles for a certain amount of time. And then we had train symbols. We had a car forwarding plan to move these cars out of industries into through trains and then quote unquote offline. And then they'd come to my railroad where I'd classify them in the yard, and we'd send them back out and trying to schedule meets at different places. And think you ended up with 4 concentric loops, right, Jack, on your layout eventually?
Yeah.
And there was just the one on mine, but the yard. So I spent a lot of time classifying cars at the yard and sort of learning the discipline of why you don't pick something up and move it to another track, like why you do it with an engine. There's a lot of railroad. As we were learning about the prototype railroad operation, we were bringing it into Babbi's in the basement and applying it to what we actually had in front of us.
Yeah, and what's interesting with model railroads sometimes is how shapeless it can look, and I think that was that was the thing we sort of started to resolve. One of the big questions we started to resolve at Babbi's is, okay, how do you take this and give it structure and give it shape? And okay, we have these certain cars that are going to get rotated in and out of these industries. Let's at least, we have certain cars that are overhead cars, through cars, but the vast majority of the traffic we had, even if the car numbers weren't perfectly in balance, had some place to go on the railroad for local delivery. So it became kind of a thing to take what looked like a shapeless mass of cars and a shapeless mass of space and track and develop a rhythm, develop a repeating cycle, develop like a schedule that made it so that, we had a plan for what we were doing and a purpose to what we were doing. And that was, I think, sort of the big breakthrough. That's the big lesson that I think carried through to the Onondaga Cutoff, which is, okay, you've got all this equipment, you've got all this track, how are you going to make it so that each thing on it has a purpose? How do you assign a purpose to each piece of equipment or each piece of track, so that you're not just there moving cars around just to move them around?
Timeout.
And that evolved over time as well. Once we got into that, answering that question for ourselves, we discovered deficiencies in the track plan as a result of trying to move these cars different ways. And it was interesting because when those same sorts of questions and problems resurfaced on the OC, I think we were a little bit more ready for the discussion.
So
a lot more.
We knew we may have had differing opinions.
Jack,
we certainly did.
But we knew which direction the discussion was going to take.
So Jack,
yeah,
when did you get married?
2005.
And when did you get married, Dave?
2008. Okay.
So from 2005, after you got married, and obviously you dated for a while there, because I think you said you met your wife in college. So from 2005 till 2008, and a couple of years after that, your wife was okay with you going over and spending evenings in another woman's house?
You like that angle, don't you?
Well,
Babbi was also
we're hard hitting journalism here. Come on.
Yeah.
Babbi was. That looked good for
75.
someone her age. I'll tell you what.
So was your wife okay with that?
Of course.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right. So let's.
There was a lot of nights I went there alone. I think Dave? What year was it? You and Heath went out west. 2002.
Yeah. Yep.
That was a really rough year. That was a really rough summer for me, and that was the summer that I didn't have hardly anything else to do. So
Bruce. This is like one of those. What's those movies at Christmas time? Chris Adams.
The Hallmark.
Yeah. This is like a Hallmark movie.
Yeah, it's in the big fancy house with the snow falling all around, and the guy comes back from the city to the small town, and
And 2002 was when Dave went out west with Heath. That was a hard summer for Jack.
And Jack was left at home pining.
Yeah, he was by himself. I see him.
Jack was in grad school. He couldn't go.
Yeah, well, I was working at transit at that time, but
that's true too. Yeah.
Yeah, it was.
So did you call him, Dave? Did you at least call him occasionally?
Of course. Oh yeah. With my flip phone, I remember texting a couple pictures or trying to. I'm not sure if it ever worked. And that 2002 was a long time ago.
And
it was.
Yeah, I mean that was an interesting summer because that summer I went up to Babbi's almost every week, and I basically took the entire track plan apart. In the at least in the middle of where all the industries were in the middle.
Okay,
which meant being up on the layout on your hands and knees.
You're just up on the layout, like
we have to stop
messing with switches, messing with track configurations. And there were nights I was just exhausted, and I left the place, with piles of track in the middle of the layout and switches all over the place.
You're exhausted because you were emotionally drained because Dave had left and gone with Heath.
Right, but I think I was trying to figure out my own
I don't know. You were
vision
emotional
for Babbi's too.
Yeah, you were emotionally drained.
Yeah.
You were emotionally drained, and you were missing Dave.
It wasn't Dave that was the problem there, but
it was back to your separation in grade school.
Yeah, it was the same thing as when you guys in grade 6 were separated, and again you were separated. Dave, I'm surprised you did that. I mean, I thought I knew you better.
Yeah, Dave's a bit of a cat.
I know, like it's like, boom, he's off with Heath.
He's off with another guy.
Who's this other man?
Yeah. And apparently, he's trying to tell us this was a major thing for him being in Babbi's basement with Jack, and yet, boom, he's gone with Heath because.
Well, Heath and Jack are very close friends now too, and my brother's in that mix as well. I mean, it's these are the wisdom keepers. These we spoke early on in my
Dave. These can't. Not all these people can be wisdom keepers. You got to cut down on your wisdom keepers. You got you got like about 100 wisdom keepers.
Yeah, I've got about 6 or 7.
So let's. This is all.
Anyway, the lonely summer of 2002.
Yeah.
So after that, you rejigged the whole layout, so it ran.
Yeah, we're done with Babbi's. That story's.
Oh, no, I want to figure out. They're still at Babbi's, but when we're in the final days of Babbi, like how does this all wind up and everything?
Well, yeah, like what happened? Did you take your just one day you back the pickup truck to the door and just start hauling your stuff out of there?
Well, no, I mean, she
got sick. She got very sick.
Well, she was sick, and she ended up there was 2 things. She ended up in a horrible car accident.
Oh dear.
Where she got T-boned at an intersection by some drunk driver at 50 miles an hour, and she was 74, 75 years old, and was in the hospital for a while, but survived and came back. She had to do the therapy and the whole 9 yards, but was feeling much better. So that was probably around the time you got married, Jack. I want to say. Maybe within that year after that. But then she ended up getting ill again, and that was more difficult to navigate because she had her immune system was compromised a little bit, and we had to be more careful about comings and goings. And so it started to become something where I felt like we were intruding more than we really had been in the past when everything was fine. And the timing of that was similar because I got married in 2008. I had bought my house. I actually bought this house in 2004. So the construction of after I did a bunch of improvements with some friends of mine that helped me replace the oil burner and the tank and redo all the plumbing and upgrade the bathrooms and all the stuff you do to an old house. I finally got married in 2008, and 2008 was about when I first started the bench work for the OC. And this was, Babbi's was continuing on because we were, Jack and I would go and run trains there, and that was still a every week or two kind of thing. But on the rest of the weeknights, was at that point I was married. Chris and I would go out to dinner or whatever, but I'd have an hour at the end of the night when she was upstairs reading. I'd come down here and I'd put a few more boards up or, work with a friend or two to get some of the bench work put together. And so that was sort of while Babbi was at its peak, 06, 07, 08, 09. That was when we were starting to really do hardcore track planning for the OC.
So maybe we could go to that.
That was the bridge. And so what's interesting is that I grew up watching trains on the Lehigh line, which is my local railroad here where I take the kids now, and you see the pictures every once in a while that I put on the AML fans page and what have you. And that's a single track main line, in the Conrail days before 1999. It really hasn't changed a whole lot, and it's added some capacity with a passing siding, but still it's a single track main line through the woods and through the farms of Western New Jersey. And
just before we go further, Dave, what eventually happened? Like eventually, you guys got all your equipment out of Babbi's house. What happened to everything that was belonged to her? And was that all left and disposed of, or you guys disposed of for you, or what happened?
I actually left a lot of my own stuff there permanently. At that point, I had just built my collection over enough years, and our standards had evolved. Like, we just got better equipment. So even though I had brought in, a Tupperware bin's worth of Santa Fe 027 boxcars or something.
Right, stuff from the 80s.
This whole series that K-Line had produced with every Santa Fe name train or something. It was something my dad had collected. And, it was like, okay, we ran with those cars when we first started because we had to. But over the years, because of the energy that layout gave me, I bought different equipment. I bought better cars. I went searching for the stuff that I really wanted. And when we took everything up, it was like okay, we knew, that layout had we put such life into it and such an investment into it that when we withdrew, that thing was going to look empty, and we needed to be careful of that. So, I took the stuff that mattered the most to me, and I left a lot of the stuff that I felt, let's just leave it here. And the other thing we put into that layout, I think that we left on the table was track, where we spent I don't know, must have been several $1,000s on Atlas track and switches. We replaced all these 027 Lionel clunker switches with these beautiful Atlas 072. We built whole interlockings out of Atlas 072 crossovers with these interlocks that had 9 or 10 crossovers in them.
So was Babbi left to run the layout by herself then?
We set it up so that even when we took our transformers back with us, that she would, someone could come down, turn the layout on, and control the track. Without it failing.
Yeah, well, basically, we wired the whole thing up to her husband's old transformers,
right?
So that they could run the trains. And my understanding is Babbi's granddaughters actually did that a little bit too after we were gone. That the kids did come down and have some fun with it. So it was nice to hear that there was a little more life left in it. As we sort of graduated up to the OC.
Yeah, and I left operating accessories there. I left buildings there.
So basically, one day you said, "Okay, we've done all we can." Turned out the lights, closed the door, and locked it, and walked away.
Yeah, and the only thing we really took was the only thing I really took was my equipment.
Cool. Yeah, can we stop talking about it now?
Because we had built everything around it. All right, you're anxious to move on. So.
I am very anxious to move on.
Yeah,
we're not doing another part after this. This is it, boys. We will talk to you again, Jack, in the future. But this is the end of your 47-part trilogy.
Not yet. 47 now, huh?
Yeah, whatever.
It's a moving target.
Yeah. So I would like to have, Jack, have you operated on other layouts?
I have.
Could you give me a short version of that? Layouts that stick out in your head, or how many layouts do you think you've operated on, and when did you start doing that? And was that Rich Winiski's doing? Rich, by the way, Rich isn't that interesting.
Poor Rich.
Somewhat. I've operated on mainly Jerry Dzik's Susquehanna, which I very much enjoy. I've operated on Ted Pamperin, CNO, Ted Olson, CNO, Perry Squire.
David Olson, CNO.
Sorry, I always call him Ted. I don't know why I do
His
that.
best friend is Ted.
Damn. Sorry. Sorry, Dave.
I honestly, I don't have a sense that any of those guys are listening, so don't worry about it.
Okay. Perry Squire, PSNN. I was at Tony Custer's once. And then the other layouts I've been to, I've been as part of the North Jersey, DC area interchange. So that's Matt Thompson's Oregon Coast.
So has this all transpired over the last 4 or 5 years, or is it?
And actually, operating other layouts has come with, that's something I had never really budgeted time for. So, doing the OC once a month is actually a fairly, relative to the rest of my life and family and the other things we plan is that's a manageable time commitment. But when you throw in, I'm going to take another.
All right, time out here. When you were first married, you were going to another woman's house. So I don't think going to the OC once a month is that much of a time commitment.
OC, that's there's a setup night. There's there's a lot of advanced setup time that I do that I never did for Babbi's. Babbi's, we never planned anything the way we do for the OC. Babbi's showed up and turned the place on.
So has this all transpired going to other layouts over the last 4 or 5 years, or has it been longer than that? And how did you get introduced to these other layouts?
I got introduced to those other layouts as sort of a tag along. I've been riding Dave's coattails here for some time.
And how long would that time be?
I would say probably the last 3-4 years.
Okay, so have you found yourself exposed to a wonderland of model railroading that you never knew existed over the last 3 or 4 years?
Well, yes.
Okay.
Yes, I've been exposed to a lot of different perspectives and a lot of different approaches. Some enjoyable, most of them enjoyable. Right. Somewhere you leave like wishing you could have done more. But
so how old of a gentleman are you, may I ask?
How old?
Yeah.
I will be 44 in a month.
So really, only just really since in your 40s have you been operating on other layouts?
Pretty much, yeah.
Yeah. So you kind of came to it late in the game, but and now you're being. So what is a couple of the layouts that were standouts for you?
Well, Dietzig's is always a standout. That's a classic example of doing, I think, just doing the right thing with what you have. You model something the right way and capture the feel of something. It's really interesting to be on a layout that doesn't have any scenery, but still feels like an operation. It still has all the intensity of an operation, all the characteristics of an operation, and a lot of times that appeals to me a lot. And maybe that's because of my 3-rail background, where and I don't mean that as that's going to come off as an insult to Jerry, but he hasn't had finished scenery for some time. Some parts of the layout are scenic, some parts of the layout are pink styrofoam, but the way it runs, you're running an operation. And then to me, that's always been like near and dear to me, because that's, I think I just come at it from a different angle, coming at it from a 3-rail angle, which is like, well, obviously the track has 3 rails, the rail is 6 feet high in scale. And, it's, you have to get over the visual, for lack of a better word, you have to get over the visual shortcomings and let yourself, get absorbed into the operational piece of it, and to really enjoy yourself.
So how much, how did were you involved in the designing of the Onondaga Cutoff, the OC? Were you?
Yeah.
Yeah?
Yep. Oh, he was instrumental. Yeah.
Jack?
The thing I did for the OC...
Hang on a minute. This is a bit, right? You guys are setting me up. Like, this is some sort of this is a gag, right? This last 6 hours of my life has been some sort of a... I've been having that. So I want to know about... so how did you guys start designing the OC? Like, what happened? Like, after Dave moved and bought his own house, like, briefly, what was the process? So it's, Dave kind of came to you one day and said, "Hey, I want to build the layout in my basement," and you guys started talking about it, or did you converse during the summer of 2002 when Dave left you by yourself, or like how did this all transpire? Like, is that kind of what happened, Dave? You just sort of went to him one day and said, "Well, we're building the layout."
Well, for the record, 2002 was a whopping 3-week trip. This wasn't the whole summer.
Well, apparently it was only 3 weeks to you. It seemed like it was a lifetime to Jack.
That was an interesting summer for both of us, actually, in different ways. But we reconvened. But this was all part of the exploration of what we were even going to model in this basement. We spent a lot of time every year out on the old PRR in Crescent, Pennsylvania, near the summit of the Allegheny Mountains. So there was talk about doing Crescent. There was talk about the Lehigh line. I actually designed Lehigh line plans to fit in this particular basement, but there was no way to do it and capture the curves the right way, because it's as we've talked about, it's really not that big a basement. It's not a huge layout. Babbi's was much larger than the OC. So how do you squeeze in features that capture the energy you're looking for in an operation in a basement this size? And my heart. I've always loved Central New York. My mom was from up there. Jack and I had gone on trips up there, both to see my family when we were kids with my family, but also several times when I was in college. And even after that, we would drive up to watch trains up there. We had a couple epic Western trips via train. And then another one where we drove in 1999, we drove to Chicago and back. That was 99, right, Jack?
Yeah. I think the breakthrough there was realizing you weren't going to model the Lehigh line.
Yeah,
and that it was going to be a continuous running, 2-track main, and then it became kind of, okay, so we're going for something completely different here. We're going for volume, and the big question Dave had to confront with the space that he had was, how do you do this without a helix? Just because a helix was such a monstrous, again, relative to the space, was such a monstrous undertaking. It was going to use up a big chunk of the physical space he had available. And did it really get you what you wanted in terms of having trains enter the territory at speed, exit the territory at speed, Do you need two of them? How are we where are we going to put the thing, and how are we going to you'd have to build the whole layout around this sort of non-functional piece of track, operationally. So, I think that became the sort of the defining moment for thinking through the design of the Onondaga cutoff was how do we get two levels without a helix and fit it to the space that we have available.
So were there designing sessions, or Dave, would you scratch something out on a piece of paper and then take it to Jack and say, what do you think of this? Or
yeah, it was a back and forth. And, Jack was able to see, when I came up with some basic ideas of what was going to go where, and I definitely wanted at least a double deck layout so that we could have staging on one level, sort of off, the main line off the territory, and then the scenic main line upstairs. And Jack was the one. I remember you stayed late at work one time, right? And I remember I got to work the next day, and I was just at wit's end trying to figure out how we were going to do this. I got to work the next day, went to my desk, and on my chair was this piece of paper in like nice color print and a little note in Jack's handwriting that said, "You owe me for this."
That was actually the name of the file.
There you go. And it was the original OC, how we were going to do the quote unquote no licks design, how we were going to link the top and bottom on a continuous 2% grade and accomplish the majority of what I wanted to do with a mainline run.
Well, now, where did you come
huge breakthrough.
Where did you come up with that term, the no licks design?
I've seen it around the hobby.
Tony Custer's come up with that before.
Could be the helix.
I've definitely seen it in Tony's articles, and I don't remember if I came up with it from Tony or if it was from someplace else. But basically it's a double deck layout or a triple deck layout with no helix at all.
I've gone from during these interviews, I've gone from, man, I can hardly wait to operate on Dave's layout back to, I'm not so sure I would fit in.
Yeah, you've already had the experience. So now you don't have to worry about it.
I know. But I'm thinking, in person, these guys are all kind of like so into this. I'm thinking, I don't know if I'd fit in again. I'm waffling back and forth.
Yeah, you got to stop worrying so much.
That's true. I don't think Bruce was, Bruce, I don't think I'm a worrier, am I?
You tend not to.
Yeah, I tend not to.
Are you worried about this, though?
No, I'm not worried about it. I'll just decide. I'm waffling. I'm a waffler, but I'm not necessarily.
Oh, fair enough. Okay. Well, then you got to stop waffling. You got to come on down. Got to give it a try. You owe me a case of beer anyway.
Yeah, but I think you guys would be disappointed with my effort.
I don't think so.
So Jack makes the initial design that the current layout is based on.
Correct.
And how did you do that? How did you do that, Jack? Shortly, you got like 3 minutes to tell him, or 2 would be preferable. Well, I mean,
wait, so you just want to know how I came up with that design?
Well, yeah, like you guys have been going back and forth, and then all of a sudden, Dave shows up at work. And there's the track plan on his chair, the foundation of the current OC. So, like, did you spend like? Did it all of a sudden come to you one day when?
Yeah, I think that's how it goes. You keep hammering at something and it comes to you. You keep thinking on it and thinking on the different aspects of it. And, the thing I actually gave him was extremely crude, and just picturing like, well, here's where the middle of your basement is. What was more interesting to me was seeing how Dave adapted it, because it almost took all the pieces that I had, lined up in perfect symmetry with one another, and slid them around, to the, either vertically or horizontally, to really match up to the space. It's very different than the original drawing I gave, but I think that's cool. That's part of the way Dave and I understand each other. You can take this concept and engineer it to precisely fit the space. There's sort of 2 different levels of vision working there, which is cool.
So was this done
I think that's one of the coolest things about it.
Was this done with pencil and paper? Was it done on CAD? Was it just done on the back?
I did it in like a little piece of CAD software or something, but it was not, to scale at all. It was really just, here's how this would look.
Were you primarily concentrating on the bench work or the track plan? I mean, it says you
really just what's the top level and what's the bottom level.
Yeah, the track plan by itself.
Right.
The bench work we had to make fit. Yep.
And these are, how are you going to get the this sort of twisted figure eight almost to connect.
And was
have the two ramps like descend in opposite directions and then loop around to come back to connect to each other.
And was Richard involved in any of this, or you met him after the?
Oh, that's the story where Jack and I were. We had us two, my buddy Mark, a few other people that would come operate with us, and we quickly ran out. We needed more people. You're running the Chicago line on a 3-to-1 fast clock, and that's in 4 hours. That's a scale 12-hour shift, and you're running 24 trains, 26 trains. I mean, it's a main line, so we needed more people to make that work. And Jack, I don't remember if it was Jack or I that suggested some of the people at work, but I remember Jack saying, "I don't know, man. They love trains, but I think we drink too much beer for them." But we invited Rich and Al. This is after the layout was basically functioning. We started running trains October 2011, and I think by that winter, January, February was Rich's first trip to the OC. And somewhere I have his email where he gave me some feedback right away, because turns out Rich had operated all over the place. I mean, he was a regular at Jerry's by that point. He'd been to a bunch of different layouts around. So he was a very good resource for us. And he was the one that opened our eyes to the fact that Jerry Dietzick was 10 miles away, and Pamprin and Olson were 30 miles away, and 35 miles away was Tony Custer. And, it was like, holy moly, I didn't realize all these people were right here. So Rich was the link.
Yeah. So a quick between the time Jack came up with the plan on your chair, how long did it take you to get all that physically in place and more or less in its final shape, ready to operate?
About 2 years. I mean, basically that design was right around 2006. I had the house and I was in the process of improving things. The first stud went up in 2008, and we already had a semblance of the track plan at that point. We already knew roughly what we were going to do.
So did you have a crew, or was this just Jack? Did you help in the actual physical construction of this?
At that time, not really very much. Physical construction isn't really my forte.
No, I had a friend of mine, the guy that helped me do the oil burner. He lived a couple towns over. We had met watching trains at Boundbrook, actually, and nice guy named was Rick Smirnoff, spelled just like the vodka. And he's this big biker dude, quite a character. But he and I hit it off really well, and we're close friends for a while. And he volunteered to come over and help. So I'd buy him sandwiches and some beers, and he'd come over. And so over the course of 2008, 2009, even into 2010, he was over here quite a bit. We were very close. My wife and I were close to he and his wife. They're about 10 years older than me. But then we had kids. They didn't have kids. And so when Susie came along in 2012, the relationship kind of faded a bit. And then they've kind of gone their own direction. So I haven't seen Rick for a couple of years now. We do text every once in a while. But Rick was instrumental with the bench work. I mean, he had a very natural knack for working with his hands. And so I learned a lot about carpentry. I learned a lot about bracing things up and leveling things. This is all stuff that I was learning for the first time. So he and I did the bench work. I did all the track work myself and the wiring myself. And that was just, fitting around stuff with my wife. And, and once Susie came along, I spent a lot less time watching trains over distance. And so I was home quite a bit more. And that was all dumped into the layout. So, by 2012, we had trains running, but there was a lot yet to go. Obviously, there's backdrop and the start of the scenery and getting the yard in place and et cetera, et cetera.
So, Jack, within 60 seconds, describe this journey you've had with Dave and got you to this point now. We're closing out your...
Within 60 seconds?
Yeah. That's the way people do it. Like, if you're ever on Jeopardy, they don't want your opinion. They just want the answer. So I'm interested. We're coming to the end now of this journey, this 37-part, this 27-part trilogy. So what is the one thing? Give us a little synopsis of what all this has meant to you over the years. This
is the bit that will go on the dust cover of the book.
Yeah, this goes in the dust cover of the book. Yeah.
Man, okay. I would say it's been, it's evolutionary. It's something where we've taken steps together. Not always at the same time. It's sort of like a weaving pattern. But that weave is actually makes the relationship stronger. Just because you're apart for a little while, we sort of get tied in knots. If you're traveling in parallel the whole time, it's too easy to split apart. I think the fact that we're sort of, on paths that cross and separate and reconnect is actually what gives it its strength.
Right. So it's been evolutionary. I like that. That's a good word.
Yeah, that's great.
I like that's excellent. I agree.
It's been an evolutionary journey which has brought you two guys to this point, with ups and downs and turns and twists, and somehow you guys got together and decided, when Lionel asks me to be interviewed, he's going to be dizzier than a trout in a blender by the time we get to the end.
Oh, that's the weave.
Yeah, that's the weave. So, Jack, let me ask you this question. This is the last question I want to ask you. Say there was an emergency in operations. Something like the guy goes through the bumper in Hoboken, falls asleep and goes through the bumper in Hoboken. And of your 13, 14, 12 employees, whatever the number is at that particular time, you drag everybody into the room, and you've got to redo the schedule on a line because there's been just a catastrophe. And there's people out there that need to get to work and need to use New Jersey Transit. So it's like in a space of 24 hours, you've got to fix this problem. You've got to revamp the schedule. You've got to make it all work because tens of thousands of people are depending upon you. You drag everybody into the room. You take all your charts, your pens, your pencils, your clipboards, your notebooks. You dump it all on the table and say, gentlemen, we have to create a new schedule for line X, Y, and Z. And then you got that. And I know most of the people are familiar with the situation. They're all good people in the department, but you got the one guy that's wearing clothes that looks like he took out of a washing machine. Is there any chance you would turn to them and say, after you explain it all, and say, and failure is not an option?
Yeah, I would say there's about a 50% chance that I would say that now.
Bruce, I'm exhausted.
It's going to be the first thing that comes to my mind.
There you go.
He'll be going up in the elevator. Failure's not an option. They'll be looking at him like, what the hell?
So the odds have increased by a lot.
Yeah, exactly. What do you think, Bruce? I'm exhausted.
I think we've about covered it in great detail. We found out a lot, and it's amazing what these two guys have done over really all their lives.
Yeah, well, since grade 5.
Well, yeah.
And then there was that. There's been some ups and downs.
Then there's the summer 2002, but
yeah, and then the summer 2002. That was an unfortunate summer for sure. 3 weeks for Dave seemed like 3 months for Jack. What was your first car, Jack?
Oh, it was an Aries K. Dodge Aries K wagon.
Oh, sweet.
Sweet. A nice Reliant out of
the K car wagon.
The K car. Yeah.
Yeah, it had a carburetor that would flood. So, I got it from Dave's dad, actually. $500.
Yep, I remember that.
Kerosene.
Yeah, because my dad used it for all his house painting in the summer. Right.
So you'd go, you'd be at an intersection, and you'd be trying to make a left out into traffic. And you had that slot, but you had to hit it. And, I'd hit the gas, and the car would just kind of roll out. Hit it again, it would kind of roll out, and eventually it would catch. And as my foot was coming off the gas, it would accelerate uncontrollably.
Perfect. I had a Dodge Dart back in the mid 70s that it got to a point where you could literally turn the wheel about a third of a turn. Nothing would happen.
The joints were a tad loose, eh?
Yeah, exactly. Bruce, could you give out our email address?
Yes, I'd love to give out our email address. Please drop us a line, Modeler's Life with 1 L, modeler'slife@gmail.com.
And we have a website, modeler'slife.com. Tells you everything you need to know about the podcast, the crew. There's a picture of Dave up there in the crew, supporting cast, and just everything you need to know about the podcast is right there at modeler'slife.com. Have you visited that site, Jack?
I think I have.
Okay,
but and the other thing, there's
a lot of sites.
Yes. There's an easy way to send the email on that webpage, too.
Absolutely, yeah. There's a picture.
Click on my smiling face.
Yep, there's a picture of the moderately agitated mailboy in a particularly agitated state. And you just click on that picture and boom. All you got to do is fill in the text and you're all set to go. Have you ever sent us an email, Jack?
I don't believe I have.
Yeah,
Would you like to, Jack?
Yeah, would you like to?
Would I like to send you an email? What do you want it to say?
Well, it doesn't matter.
That's a yes or no question, Jack.
Yeah. You like gladiator movies, Billy?
Yeah.
Have you ever been to a Turkish prison?
I would love to.
Head with an iron boot.
If I would love pretzels. We need pretzels.
I like pretzels.
I like pretzels.
You ever hang around a gymnasium?
I can imagine. What's your wife's name, Jack? I forget.
Denise,
yeah. I can imagine it. A poor woman. When they got on the day they got married, the minister, or whatever, turns to Jack and does the spiel and says, "Do you accept this woman?" Blah blah blah. And it was a simple yes or no answer. And boy, Jack goes on for 10 minutes about, well, That
might have been the last time it was a simple yes or no answer. And except for the last time hey, Jack, do you want to go out for beers? Yes.
Jack, if you go to a Midwest Model Railroad, their URL is midwestmodelrr.com. Right there, they have an internet presence. If you go there, you scroll across the navigation bar and click on AML. You'll be a wonderland of AML merchandise is there. Mugs, hats, hoodies, T-shirts. Well, a hoodie just like the one Bruce is wearing tonight.
Yes, sir.
Mm. And
or one similar to it in different colors and sizes.
Yeah, colors, sizes, whatever. Yeah. What size are you, Jack?
I would say I'm an adult medium.
An adult medium. You would say? You're not sure?
Well, it depends. A lot of times the manufacturers, sizing's all different. You never know what you're going to get.
Right. So
most of the time I go for a medium.
Okay. Would you take a large?
If that's all you had.
Yeah. Not that I'm sending you a T-shirt. I was just wondering. How tall of a man are you?
I'm approximately 6 feet.
Really? And you're a medium? Like, what do you weigh? Like 30 or 130 pounds?
No, I just, I like something that, fits.
You like you like your belly button?
A little more fitted.
Oh, okay. You like them skin tight? Our buddy Spoon, Mike Ostertag, he likes them skin tight.
Well, I don't say skin tight. I'm just not hanging off me.
Okay.
So you're somewhere between hanging off of you and spandex.
Yeah. Man, what a journey this has been. I'll be dying to see if we get any emails about this. Because you're an interesting guy. Both of you together are really interesting guys.
We appreciate the opportunity to talk. This is always a pleasure.
Yeah. I'm just not sure I'm qualified for this level of intellect to interview you. Maybe that's the problem. Maybe you guys are just way a higher level of intellect than I am, and I'm just not qualified for such things.
I think we just figured out after 6 hours that can't be the case.
That was a lot of. It was. We're going to talk to you again, Jack. And after you listen to this, then man, I thought we made great headway about what it's like to being the guy in charge of operations. So is one of you guys going to end up as the president in New Jersey Transit?
Oh, I hope not.
Yeah, I don't know. That's a different job than it was when we started. That's for sure.
That would be great, though. Have you ever done that, Dave? Have you ever had a situation where you've had to drag the whole crew in and say, "We've got a plugged toilet in such and such a station, and we've got to fix it, and here's the parts, and gentlemen, failure's not an option."
Never with the toilet, but when COVID hit, yeah, it's exactly what we had to do.
Boom. And did you say that failure was not an option?
Yeah, I mean, what else are you going to do? I told everybody it's now or never. Like we've never been important before, except to ourselves, and we are about to become more important than anything else in the company for a while. So we need to get out there and we need to do it right, and we need to have some pride in what we're doing. And you can't drop the ball here. The spotlight is going to be shining. Make sure everybody is dancing. That's how I put it.
Wow. The spotlight is going to be shining. Make sure everybody's dancing. I love that.
Wow.
Yeah, we could use that here. If we could get this, we can't even get the spotlight turned on.
No, yeah, we haven't found the switch yet.
Yeah, we're still stumbling around in the dark trying to find the switch. I would, you know what? If I ever get the chance to visit you guys at New Jersey Transit, and I'm ever, I think that you guys would be best off just to introduce me as your half-wit brother, your slow brother, Steve.
What? Is this a bit?
No. I just think you'd be better off if people be like, "What are you doing with that guy?"
I will say with to Dave's point there, that is one thing about managing people that's very different is you have a different perspective on what's important and when you're being watched, and the things that people watch for are not always the things that the people on your staff take the most pride in, or take the you think is their most valuable work. I'll put it that way. So it's that's something when we do end up in a situation like that. Those are actually the words I use. I emphasize to my staff that this is something everybody's going to see. Whether it's your favorite thing to be working on or not. This is why what you're doing is important.
And
failure is not an option. There we go.
I love it.
Perfect.
Yeah.
See, I can be taught.
There you go. I think, did we cover everything? We did. We
got the email address. We talked about the website. We talked about the merchandise. I guess there's only one thing left for you to do.
Yeah. Do you remember what you got to say, Jack?
Yes.
All right. Well, Jack, as we close the barn doors on another episode of A Modeler's Life, and the sun slowly sets over the back 40, I guess there's nothing else left to do except for you to say,
happy rails to you.
While in Busted Knuckle, guests of A Modeler's Life podcast stay at the Casa del Sol Motor Court and Inn, where late-night dancing at the Rumba Room is a magical event to be experienced.
It's another Lincoln Homer.
Beautiful. Beautiful. That was an epic trilogy. Epic. I thought we really made headway about the operations thing on this one.